to the first Q&A of the new year. I hope that you've had some time to relax and get to enjoy yourselves and family, despite the fact that the holiday was quite a bit different this year with COVID. There's a lot to cover today in the intro, and before I get to questions, I want to make sure that we can focus on addressing the topic that I know is top of mind for everyone, and that is what is happening in Washington, D.C., which is truly a terrible moment in the history of our country in the United States. And it's deeply troubling to witness this kind of violence in the nation's capital. What we watched and saw in real time on TV, that wasn't a protest. Right? That was a violent insurrection, and it was deeply, deeply disturbing. You just can't have a functioning democracy without a peaceful transition of power. That's critical. And that is why I just think it's so important that our political leaders lead by example, make sure that we put the nation first here. And what we've seen is that the president has been doing the opposite of that, and instead, fanning the flames of those who think that they should turn to violence to overturn the election outcome. So yesterday, we moved quickly to remove the posts by the president that violated our policies, including a video of his in which he expressed support for the people causing the violence. We ultimately assessed that there were two policy violations against the page, which resulted in a 24-hour feature block. So he lost the ability to post on the platform during that same time. But as I shared this morning, these completely shocking events of the last 24 hours, I think, have clearly demonstrated that the president intends to use his remaining time in office to undermine the peaceful and lawful transition of power to his elected successor, Joe Biden. And, his decision to use his platform to condone rather than condemn the actions of his supporters in the Capitol, I think has rightly bothered and disturbed people in the U.S. and all around the world. And not only did we remove these statements yesterday because we judged that their effect and perhaps their intent would be to provoke further violence, but we wanted to take this additional action. So over the last several years, we've allowed the president to use our platform consistent with our own rules. And at times we've removed content or labeled posts when they violated our policies. And we did this all because we believe that the public should have access to the broadest possible amount of political speech, even when it's controversial. But the current context that we're in now is fundamentally different, involving the president trying to use our platform and others to incite a violent insurrection against a democratically elected government. So, at this point, we believe that the risk of allowing the president to continue to use the services during this period are too much. And that's why, as I announced this morning, I'm going to be extending the block that we placed on President Trump's accounts, his Facebook and Instagram accounts. We'll be extending those blocks indefinitely and for at least the next 2 weeks until the peaceful transition of power is complete. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Guy and Monica in a moment to talk about our policies and actions in more detail. But before I do that, I want to reiterate that I know this is just a very difficult moment for a lot of us here, and especially our Black colleagues. It was troubling, I think, to see how people in this mob were treated compared to the stark contrast that we saw during protests earlier this year. So to all of our employees, and I just want you to know that if you need, to take some time to process this, everything that's going on, I hope you do. And, we have the resources at the company, and you can contact your HR VP, who can point you to the support. So that's what I wanted to say up front about this. And now I'm going to hand it off to Monica to discuss our actions in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Mark, and hi, everybody. I'm Monica Bickert. I lead our content policies. And before I get into how those policies are applying today, I first want to start by just thanking everybody, all the employees across different teams who have been working really nonstop to respond to yesterday's horrific events and to make sure that we're prepared for any developments going forward. And I want to say that work by those teams did not just start yesterday. These teams have spent weeks tracking the developments around protests planned in DC and elsewhere around the United States, making sure that we were doing what we could to find and remove any content that violated our policies. And those teams are working together in our virtual election operations center. And so it was by virtue of having that center that we had the team that was ready and prepared to be able to quickly respond to the events yesterday. So I want to share some of the specifics of how our policies apply here. And some of the policies that have been the most important overall here are actually ones that are relatively new, ones that we put in place over the course of the past year. And the first one I'd point to is an expansion that we did of our dangerous organization policy. Basically, we're now removing violence-inducing conspiracy networks like QAnon and also militarized social movements. And we've removed hundreds of those movements since we put this policy in place. And so that put us in a fundamentally different position here. And then the second policy that we have in place is a framework for identifying when there are locations that are more at risk for violence or for intimidation through the threat of violence, where we should be applying the same protections that we apply to, say, schools and polling places and houses of worship. And so what that policy means is basically we now have a policy that says during this time of heightened risk, we will remove any calls for people to bring weapons to any location in the United States, not just in Washington, D.C., but anywhere. And that includes protests. And then turning specifically to some of the actions we took in response to the violence in D.C. yesterday. First, we're removing any content that praises or supports the violence or that is posted by those who participated in it. So, for instance, this would include if somebody had shared footage of himself, running into a building, storming a building or an office, or if somebody was praising that action, that's content that we would remove. And then second, and Mark really walked through this, but we did remove a video and a post that were shared by President Trump yesterday because they violated our policies. And while these weren't the most straightforward violations, given the circumstances that were unfolding, we felt that these posts did more to contribute to rather than diminish the risk of continuing violence. When we took that action, and Mark's post goes into more detail on this, but when we took that action, it triggered what we call a feature block. And that means basically that this is what we do under our policies. If people continue to violate our policies, then we restrict them from posting anything on Facebook. And so basically right now, we've extended the block on the president's Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts indefinitely, at least through the peaceful transition of power. And that means that his accounts cannot post, it can't it can't live stream on Facebook or on Instagram. Like Mark said, in the current context, we think the risk of allowing him to continue to use our services is simply too great. And I want to say that I know that in the past few years, we've made a number of difficult calls around the world, including in the U.S. with rising political tensions. And I know that there are strongly held views about many of those decisions. We know that, and that is something that we take into account as we continue to learn from what we are doing and make sure that we do have the right policies in place and procedures in place to get to the right decision when whatever the circumstances are on the ground. And when I look at the decisions that we made over the course of the past 24 hours, I am very confident that we have made the right decisions here. Before I hand it over to Guy, I just want to address one other thing that I've seen coming up in the comments, which is that some people have asked why we didn't trigger Safety Check. And Safety Check is, I just want to respond to that. Safety Check is a global tool that we have built to be applied globally. It's really hard for us to have up-to-date information to make sure that we can apply that globally and fairly around the world. And so we have a very defined set of criteria for when we will actually employ it. And this circumstance didn't fall into that criteria, so it wasn't applied. And with that, again, thank you to the teams who are working on this. The events that we saw were atrocious. They were appalling to people who work on responding to violence in the regular course of their jobs. And so the teams are taking this seriously. And I'm going to turn it over to Guy to talk about the specifics of how we are enforcing the policies I've explained. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. Hey, everyone. I'm Guy Rosen. I work on integrity. Stepping back a little bit, we actually kicked off this week with our Elections Operations Center running in anticipation both of the Georgia election that happened on Tuesday, but also of the proceedings yesterday and the planned protests as part of the presidential election. Now, as a reminder that the Elections Operations Center that we have, it brings together virtually for now, since we're all at home, teams across operations, policy, engineering, data science, investigations, legal, many others. And we all come together to help us streamline our ability to detect and to respond to events during sensitive periods such as these. Now, as part of this activity, in our monitoring and our work over the past days, we've actually taken a number of additional actions across our platform, and particularly as we monitored the events that were unfolding yesterday. These are things to help limit the spread of content that could potentially lead to further civil unrest, further violence. And it includes things such as Monica mentioned, identifying and removing any calls to bring arms to locations anywhere across the US, limiting the spread of content based on signals from our AI systems. If they predict something might violate our community standards in areas such as hate speech or graphic violence or incitement to violence, we may limit the spread of that content. We're also increasing requirements that group admins have to review and to approve posts in certain groups. This is a really important capability that helps ensure that admins are properly policing their groups and being held accountable for violations that may be happening there. And in some groups, we're even going further, and we have a system that is able to freeze commenting on threads in cases where our systems are detecting that there may be a thread that has hate speech or violence sort of in the comments. And that is sort of spiraling out of control, as it were. Now, all of these, and really all of the systems, all of the tools that we activated, these are all things we've built over the past 3-4 years as part of our investments into the integrity space, or efforts to protect the election. And it's really a result of all this incredibly hard work by countless people, so many people across so many teams, that we had all of these systems, we had these processes running, we had these teams ready, certainly for the events of this week. Now, as yesterday unfolded, the teams were constantly reevaluating the situation, reevaluating our response, and as the gravity and the severity of the situation became clear, we designated, as Monica mentioned, that sort of the storming of the Capitol as an event that we don't allow praise or support on the platform for, and then we were able to remove the video from the president and quickly remove a post that came just a bit later that violated those policies, and eventually to block the page and the Instagram account as a result as well. Now, I know in days like yesterday, every minute seems like an eternity, but I can assure you that your colleagues, all of us, were working really quickly to make sure we're understanding the situation, identifying what we need to do, and taking action as quickly as possible. Now, just to reiterate, what Mark and Monica have said, everyone's appalled at the violence yesterday. Looking into the next days, the next weeks, we will continue to monitor the situation, to take any additional action that we need, and we'll deploy any additional measures as required by the developments that are really happening on the ground and on our platform. With that, Mark, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Monica and Guy. I'm grateful for all the work that you and the teams are doing. And I want to reiterate again that I know that this is a difficult moment for a lot of our employees. And I want you all to remember that we do have resources available as a company in case you need help or support, and I hope that you use them. Now, before we jump over to Q&A and answering employee questions, there are a few other topics that I want to make sure that we cover as well. The first is the situation with COVID, which remains, I'd say, extremely serious. Now, unfortunately, the numbers here continue to look very bad, both in California and across the country, and I guess across a lot of countries in the world too. And there's some new dynamics here. There are new, more transmissible strains of COVID, like what we first saw in the UK and now we're seeing in South Africa. And they're now here in the US and in other countries, and that is of course a big cause for concern. On the flip side, it's obviously encouraging that the vaccine, the data on that has been very positive, and it's now being rolled out. Now, of course, I think I join a lot of people in wishing that the rollout was faster here, but I continue to be optimistic that over the coming months it's going to be widely available. So we're going to continue keeping everyone updated as we learn more about this, but this is obviously a very important and sensitive and difficult situation as well. Another topic: before the holiday, we held our first company-wide all hands, and it was the first remote all hands that we've ever done. I spent the time talking about the principles that we stand for as a company, the priorities that we need to execute on in order to continue making progress for our community, and some of the things that I'm most excited about in terms of what we're going to deliver in terms of innovation and new products and services in 2021 and beyond. A number of our other leaders also covered a number of other important topics as well, our product roadmap, our business, and discussing what we stand for. So, I'm looking forward to the year ahead, although this was perhaps not how any of us were hoping that the year would start. I thought that the all hands was, a lot of hard work went into it, and I was excited about how that came together. And I would encourage you, if you haven't taken the time to watch it yet, I would encourage you to do so. I think there's a lot of good content in there that tries to summarize, what we're here to do, what our mission is about, what our values are about, and kind of how we're going to execute that in details. Okay, last thing in the intro, before we get to the questions, I just wanted to make a note that we are going to be making a few changes to our Q&A format that I think will be helpful. And we're doing this because we moved to this online format when when COVID began. But I think the goal is to get it to be, incorporate more of the traditions and kind of interactivity that we used to have when we were back in the office, assuming that we might be doing this online for a while longer. So we're going to make an effort to bring in some additional voices to our Q&As, so you can hear both from the people who are asking the questions and from more of a diversity of leaders on different topics. We're going to be letting employees pre-record and submit questions, so that way we can actually see their faces and hear from them directly, instead of me just kind of reading the quick summary of the question that's on the thread. And we're also going to try to add in some new programming in the weeks ahead, including, having stories from our community about how people use our services. That was always one of my favorite ways to end the week before, and what we did at the end of the Q&A is, and we've dropped that since we went to this online format, but I'd love to get that back, and we'll start that today. But the idea of all this is just to get back to, some of the spirit that we had at our weekly in-person Q&As before most of us were working remotely. So moving forward, Melinda on our internal comms team is going to be the new MC of the Q&As, and is going to help facilitate these conversations. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melinda to ask the top questions on the thread.
Hey, Mark, thank you very much. And hey, everybody out there, Happy New Year to you. As Mark said, we're trying some new things. I'm excited to be here with you. And without further ado, let's get started. So as Mark mentioned, we're adding in pre-recorded questions to Q&A. And so let's hear the first pre-recorded question about working from home.
Hey, Mark, this is Taya here from the People Services Experience team. I was just wondering, Google has extended their work from home until September, and they've also started to offer flexible work weeks. So I was just wondering if we were going to extend our work from home, or if we would also consider offering flexible work weeks.
Good. I think it's nice to get the questions in person. Those were the number 1 and number 2 most voted questions by people this week. But I'll kind of answer them together. Overall, I think that they're reasonable things to consider. So we're certainly going to be considering both of them, what the dates are that people will come back into the offices, and what flexible work might look like. But as of right now, I don't think we have any new information that suggests that answers to those things yet. So in terms of when we think people will get back in the office, I mean, this is, I think the next top voted question is about vaccine rollout. And, I think a lot of this is going to depend on, a lot of this is going to depend on, obviously the trajectory of the virus, how the vaccine rollout goes. And I'm still optimistic, as I said in the intro, that that we'll get broader coverage of the vaccine over the next several months, but that will help facilitate bringing the numbers down. And that sometime, around the midway point through the year, it'll be possible for everyone everyone roughly to be able to work back in the offices again, unless you're choosing to work remotely. So we don't have any more precision on how that's going to go right now. So we haven't thought that it was necessary or useful to change the date on that, but we'll certainly keep watching that closely. On flexible work, I think that this is clearly something that people are interested in. A number of other companies, including Microsoft and Google, have said that they're going to experiment with that. I know that we have people here who are thinking about that deeply as well. I'm starting to think about what that could look like as well. It doesn't feel like there's any particular rush to come to a conclusion on that, given that right now we're kind of all remote. But we have a history of allowing flexibility in how people work. Some of the question and discussion that I've seen about this is, are we basically going to require people to choose between, working remotely or being in the office 5 days a week? And the reality is we don't currently require people to be in the office 5 days a week. And a lot of people, we have no meeting days, and a lot of people work from home 1 day a week. We try to give people a lot of flexibility about their schedule. So if you need to make different appointments or do different things, we're not particularly rigid about when you need to kind of be in the office or be at your desk. And we'll certainly think about whether it makes sense to extend some of that further. But at the same time, I think if you're going to be in the office as the primary place that you work, and part of the virtue and benefit of that is that that there's going to be a critical mass of your team around. I think it makes sense to have some guidelines around how that works too. So we'll continue thinking through that, but I don't have anything new to announce on either of those points today, and we'll just kind of continue seeing how COVID evolves, and that will guide some of this stuff. Shall we go to the next one?
All right, Mark, thank you very much. The next question on a lot of folks' minds right now as we continue to work from home, and as you mentioned about vaccines. So how many vaccines do you think need to be rolled out before we will reopen the offices?
So the vaccine being rolled out is one important input in getting the virus under control. But at the end of the day, our decision about when we're going to open up offices is related to that overall picture of the virus under control and making sure that we can provide a safe work environment for people more than just vaccines. And there have been a number of countries around the world that have been able to get the virus under control, well before the vaccine was available. And in a lot of these places we have the offices are open and a lot of people are in them. So clearly this stuff isn't just going to be tied to the vaccine being rolled out. In the US and a number of other places, I do think that the vaccine is going to be critical, as will be testing and having good protocols around that. And as I've said a couple of times already today, I think it's on the one hand pretty amazing that we got a vaccine, got a number of vaccines within a year, compared to some of the more aggressive projections where behind the schedule for vaccinating people. But I'm at least optimistic that some of these things will be able to chalk up to early inefficiencies in the logistics, and that this will get worked out hopefully over the coming months. So I still believe that by the end of this quarter, by the end of this half, these are going to be widely available, and I think that that's going to be very important for being able to get the virus under control broadly, and therefore the office is open for everyone who wants to be in them. But at the end of the day, we're not going to tie that to a certain prevalence of vaccine distribution. We're going to tie that to those decisions to a kind of prevalence of people with COVID as a portion of the population, as we've done so far.
All right, Mark, thank you very much for that answer. Let's get to another pre-recorded question, this time about hybrid work models and the potential of them at Facebook.
Hi, Mark. My name is Natalia. I'm a software engineer on connectivity analytics platform team, and I would like to know if you considered hybrid work model where we could work in the office 2-3 times per week instead of full 5 days or completely remote option. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I take from that this was 2 of the top voted questions, that this is on a lot of people's minds, and that's consistent with the survey data that we've seen in terms of what people think that they might want in terms of work arrangements after people can get back in the office. So we hear that, and we're thinking about that. Again, right now, I don't know that there's, this isn't compared to some of the other situations that we're dealing with this week or over the next month, I don't know that we have exactly the same urgency for solving this because we're not all going to be back in the office for some period, but in general, I think it's a reasonable thing to think about, and we need to figure out what the guardrails on that should be. I don't think it would make sense to just say that there are no norms around how teams should work. I think that would probably not be optimal for teams getting work done. I also think that some things we need to think through how whether there are things that we want to be common across the whole company compared to having different teams develop their own norms. Part of the value there is that if something is common across the whole company, it gives people more career opportunities and ability to switch between teams, and that enables teams to work together well, compared to if you have teams making up their own, having their own kind of norms on this stuff. That might make some of those things more difficult. So I think there are a bunch of questions that we need to think through, and we're certainly going to think through whether it makes sense to do more here. But I think that these are completely reasonable questions, and this is certainly noted.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer, Mark. And I want to stress before we get to the next question, I was looking through the comments and just want to keep in mind that these are still the top 5 questions that have been voted up this week. We've just asked a lot of the question askers to present those questions to you in the form of video. All right, so let's get to the next question. And speaking of questions, it's an HR question about the questions. Take it away.
Hey Mark, Martin here. I have a question for you. We've seen a lot of HR-related questions dominate the Q&A polls lately, and in an attempt to balance that more with org, product, and policy questions, I wanted to ask if you are supportive of more specific HR-related Q&A sessions, addressing those questions, but then also freeing up time in this Q&A for a broader set of topics. Thank you.
So I think that that's a great idea, and I would love that. I think certainly the HR questions that people ask are important and certainly are kind of relevant topics for people to ask me at this Q&A. I agree with the sentiment that there are other important things too, in addition to them, whether it's products and how we're serving our community or serving small businesses, questions about our strategy. Certainly there are a lot of questions that do get asked about our policies and the impact that we have on the world. And I think, being able to make sure that we discuss all of these things is important. So, getting back to your question, I would support and I would encourage the teams to try out the idea, organize an HR Q&A. Let's try it once and see how useful it is. My sense is that it will be useful to hear from those leaders. I think whenever we get to hear from Lori and Janelle and folks, we benefit. They're deeply thoughtful about all the work and the policies that we have to put in place, balancing the needs of I think it's on the order of 60,000 full-time employees at this point, but at the same time, I think part of the reason why people ask the questions here that I just want to make sure we kind of see clearly, it's not that the information isn't available in other places, right? There are formats, forums where Lori and other folks are answering these questions. We have a group. I forget exactly what it's called off the top of my head, but it's kind of an HR policy group where people can ask questions. I think a lot of the stuff is documented in our wikis and things. So I don't actually get the sense when people ask me these questions, it's not necessarily the case that they're asking that because there is no other place for them to get the information. I think some of this is that people are simply unsatisfied with the answers that they've gotten in other places and want to escalate it further and make sure that it is a topic that that I'm thinking about, which I think is a fine thing to do. Again, I don't think that these issues should be the only thing that kind of dominate the Q&As, but I think it is reasonable to consider these, especially in the time of COVID, when the way that we're all living and working is so in flux. I think that makes sense. But if you take the questions like the ones that we've answered so far about what are the policies around when we'll open up certain offices, or how are we thinking about work balance and kind of flexible work. I didn't actually say anything new there. I think that we haven't discussed before, except to maybe say that I think it's a reasonable question that we'll continue reflecting on it. But in terms of what the stance is, all this information in terms of the HR policies is typically available in these other forums across the company.
Excellent. Thanks for that thoughtful response, Mark. Okay, so rounding out our top 5, let's get to another pre-recorded questions about one of our products, Workplace.
Hi, Mark. I'm Brian. I work on the Feed Health team in Seattle. Microsoft Teams saw explosive growth last year. Why wasn't Workplace the main tool people use to connect in the shift to remote work? Thank you.
This is a good question. So, first of all, Workplace did grow very quickly. I want to make sure I don't get the exact stats wrong, but there are now many millions of kind of paying customers, right? Or customers who are paying for many millions of people to use the product. So we didn't see that. But at the same time, I think you're right in the spirit of your question that the products that have grown the quickest over the last year are ones that are not primarily focused on kind of organizational communication and cultural communication like Workplace has been, but are focused on more kind of direct meetings in things like Zoom or to some degree, what we've seen with Teams. I mean, I think that's been the part of Teams that's really exploded and done the best. So we're certainly learning from that. We're going to continue supporting Workplace and the work that we can uniquely do there around organizational communication and making it so people can share things and it can get distributed all throughout an organization in an interface that people are used to and comfortable with, because a lot of people use Facebook and our other products, and Workplace kind of has a similar format. I mean, those are all reasons why a lot of large and small companies appreciate and love Workplace. So we'll keep on doing that. But at the same time, I think going forward, a lot more of our focus is going to be on empowering small businesses, and not just through our kind of advertising tools and the platforms that we have on Facebook and Instagram, but enabling those teams to very easily set up meetings and do video chat using the video tools that we have, and tie that into the kind of org communication that they have, but maybe not as but focusing a little bit more on the use cases that seem to be growing quickly there. One aside is we have seen very quick growth in the video chat products, obviously, that we offer, which are more on the consumer side. We shared some stats around New Year's of how widely some of these services were used. I think there were more than 1 billion calls on WhatsApp. I think it was almost 1.5 billion calls on New Year's. And obviously some of the other products that we have that are just focused on this, like Portal, had very good years, and a lot of people bought that and were enjoying it for the first time, and found it very useful. So that's the main learning that we have there, and we're gonna certainly focus more of our efforts in that direction.
All right, Mark, let's take a look at some of the comments here. Lots of people saying that they are appreciative of your question answering and love the idea that you're interested in actually thinking about doing an HR-related Q&A session as well. Want to look at some of the questions that are coming up in the comment section now?
Sure. Let's look through some of this and see if I can pick some of these up. Yeah, and I hope Lori doesn't mind that I just signed her up to do a Q&A. But I think that's I think it'll be useful, and I'm curious to see what the feedback is on that and whether that actually achieves the goal of alleviating any of the pressure on HR questions at these Q&As. But I think that's all fair. Okay, there are a bunch of different themes that we're seeing here. Maybe I'm seeing a number of questions about some of the COVID remarks that I made, especially more Europe focused. Europe is locking down again. Is there any more info on the super strain you can share with us? Anything new from CZI? Another question, what about the worst strains of coronavirus that you were just talking about? Look, I always want to be careful when I talk about this stuff. I am not, I'm not a medical expert on this stuff, but I can summarize from some of the folks that I've gotten the opportunity to work with at CZI what I've heard. The current understanding of some of these new strains is that they are not necessarily more deadly or more damaging, but they are more viral and spread a lot more efficiently. And I think that is very worrisome for a number of reasons. Now some people have the reaction of, oh, good, it's not more lethal, but as one person in our analytics team pointed out to me this week, if you wanted to basically design something that was going to have a bigger negative impact, you would have something that would infect more people widely with a lower lethality than something that basically would burn out faster because it was extremely lethal. So I do think that these are very serious. Another thing that anyone who's worked on any products that have been involved in people basically spreading them to multiple of their friends knows that if a new strain of COVID is now, say, for example, 30% more effective at spreading, that's going to reach a lot more people. It probably will reach a lot more than 30% more people, just because that compounds every day. So that's a very big deal. And then you kind of compare that with the fact that in certain places, I think this is what led the UK to do their lockdown. I know that we have a very dire situation in LA right now, where a lot of the hospitals are near capacity. And these strains have not really very broadly been spread yet in the US. So I think that this is going to be a phenomenon that will play out a lot more over the next couple of months. And I think that the capacity of the hospitals is going to be really strained by this. So, I think the good dynamic that we have going on is that the vaccine is being rolled out. The bad dynamic is that there are now these new strains. And I think to some degree, how things go over the next few months is going to be a function of which one of those spreads faster. If the vaccine spreads faster, and we can get the logistics worked out on that, then that may be enough to prevent some of these faster spreading strains from being really catastrophic. But if we don't, I think the stakes are now even higher for making sure that the vaccine can get rolled out faster. So that's kind of my understanding of the state of play. And I don't think that scientifically we really understand as much about the new strains Yet, I think the current belief is that the vaccines will be generally effective against it as well. I think that there was some question that some folks had about whether the South African strain in particular was a little more different and may have and some of the drugs and things that we've developed may be a little less effective against it. But overall, I think people are pretty optimistic that the vaccines will generally be effective against them. So that's what that is. That's kind of the sum of what I know at this point. But I'll keep you updated. All right, let's see what else. An opposite question. What am I most looking forward to in 2021? Seeing all of you. I mean, it's as nice as it is to do these Q&As staring at a camera. I much would prefer to see to get a chance to work with people in person and see all of you. I think it's been to some degree incredible how much we've been able to get done given this way of working, and there are pluses of it, but I do just think that it's just so nice to be in person with people, and that doesn't mean that I'm still excited about enabling remote work too. But I think even for people who work remotely, we'll have to basically create norms and structures where people come together periodically to build teams and cohesion. That will be very important. And, just like some of the other work flexibility questions, I haven't spent that much time thinking about exactly what the norms need to be on teams coming together when they're working remotely. It's just not relevant right now. But I think that will be, that'll all be pretty important. All right, what else do we have? I mean, there's some questions I think for Guy or Monica. There's relevant to the events that are going on right now. Why have you not taken similar action against other international leaders? I think that's probably a question for Monica and the policy leader. How are we preparing for a potential violent event between now and inauguration on January 20th? I think that's probably a good one for Guy to take in terms of all the operational steps that we're putting in place. So maybe you two can jump in and answer those.
Sure, happy to. So I want to emphasize that this was not the actions that we took in removing President Trump's video and post yesterday. That wasn't a new policy. That was our response to a specific situation based on our assessment of risk. So we have established policies about the speech we allow when people talk about violent acts. Those policies apply around the world, including to politicians. And we have actually removed, on a number of situations, we've removed posts from major national figures, including I can think of cases where it's been a senior leader in a country, but also legislators in a country for violating those policies.
On the second question around our readiness for the next couple of weeks and how we're planning for that, I think the way to think about it is there's perhaps three lines of defense, three layers of our work. First one is we have built simply over the past several years many systems. We have thousands, tens of thousands of people working to review content, to build systems that detect content. And that works 24/7 all the time, and ensures that our systems and our people are reviewing and finding and taking down content that might violate our policies. Now, on top of that, we have built, as I mentioned earlier, Operations Center, which for the especially sensitive times helps bring together, in fact, representatives, as it were, of those same people to ensure that we have a much tighter loop in communicating, in anticipating new scenarios and reacting to things as they unfold, because there are, we can plan as much as we like, but there's always going to be new things that happen that are unexpected. And so it's really on us to make sure that we have the process and the people to communicate, to share the information, to make decisions based on what is coming to light. And And so that's our operations center, which is an incredibly important part of what we've been doing, particularly over the past several months, and certainly, this week has been critical and will continue to be. And then the last thing I want to mention is our what we call our election defense measures, or been referred to as break glass often, which are additional technical capabilities that we developed to add simply more lines of defense to help us slow the spread of content, get a little bit more time so that we can review and we can make the right decisions on content that's spreading on our platform. We have been activating some of those. We spoke about a number of those around the election period. Some of those persisted, and we're continuing to activate those based on what we're seeing manifesting on the platform. They're tailored to specific kinds of behavior that we are monitoring, or we're anticipating, or we want to prevent out of an abundance of caution. So we're working across those three. Certainly, all of the teams working on this, we're going to be staying very vigilant over the next several weeks. This is absolutely going to continue to be a delicate time. And, hugely grateful for the teams that are working around the clock on this stuff.
All right. I'm just looking through some of the other questions. There are a number of other things about just what am I focused on in 2021 and priorities. This was one of the big themes that we talked about at the all hands before the end of the year. The high level company priorities remain the same. We have 4 priorities. The first one is to continue making progress on the big social issues that we in the internet are at the center of. So certainly, it's some of these content issues that we've seen this week are certainly a big area that we'll want to keep on working and improving what we do. But there are other areas too, like privacy is just a massive area that we're investing in, and I expect us to make a lot of progress this year. We're making a lot of exciting investments and kind of improving deeply all of the infrastructure that we build to make it more privacy aware, and working on infrastructure to make all of our messaging apps end-to-end encrypted and things like that. The second priority is around basically continuing to build new experiences for our community, and to build the infrastructure to build even more good new experiences in the future. So, that's a lot of what I'm excited there is around some of the communities work that we're doing. A lot of people on Facebook and Instagram and the messaging apps now, use the apps increasingly to communicate with groups of people, and those communities are a lot of the most meaningful parts of those apps, whether it's a thread that you have where you're keeping in touch with the people that matter the most to you during COVID when you can't see people in person, or some groups for interests or physical communities that you really care about, that you that are some of the most central parts of how you use Facebook, or the ability to so dynamically follow your interests and get more content and kind of see what the community is around the things that you're interested in emergent culture on Instagram. Those are some of the things that I'm most excited about doubling down on and investing in more this year. We have that. We're continuing to focus on building out the private social platform through our messaging apps. So I talked about making everything end-to-end encrypted as kind of the foundation of that, building more functionality into it. This year, we improved a lot of video calling work a lot, and that's been widely used. We're starting to roll out payments more, a lot of interesting tools around that for people to interact, not just with people, but with businesses. That's going to be really important. So that kind of stuff is all really central. And then longer term, there's, of course, the Facebook Reality Labs work that we're doing that is that I think is really starting to kick it into a much higher gear there, where the Quest 2 sales have been great. And I think we sold more Quest 2s in the first 7 weeks of its existence than we did Quest 1 the whole time. And we were pretty happy with how Quest 1 did. So that's doing pretty well. A lot of exciting stuff coming this year and the next year on the FRL front, as we build towards long-term having kind of the kind of regular looking AR glasses that we can all just wear on a daily basis. We're still several years out from that, but we're building towards that nicely, and I'm really proud of how that team is executing. So that's kind of the second priority. The first one was continue making progress on the big social issues. 2 is continue delivering improvements and meaningful experiences to people. 3 is serving small businesses, because that's the core of the economy, and it's the core of our business too. And we're building out new tools through things like shops across Facebook and Instagram, and we'll build those into WhatsApp and Messenger soon too. We're working on a number of new tools for small businesses to interact with their customers through messaging. We bought a company called Customer that's going to help us really turbocharge some of that work. But overall, I continue to be very excited about that. That's just a critical part of what we do. And I think it's underappreciated, but really the biggest part of our business is serving small businesses. So when we help small businesses, that in the end is what drives our business and makes our business better as well. So we were very focused on that. And then the last priority, the fourth priority, is to continue communicating what we stand for. And I think we have a lot of work to do on this. And I think a lot of people don't feel like they understand what we stand for. And it's been a difficult environment for us to really cut through and explain that in a way that I think really comes across. And we're going to continue focusing on that. It's just critical. People knowing what we stand for is the foundation of trusting us and understanding why we make the decisions that we make. So we're going to kind of keep on pushing on that. So those are the big 4 priorities that I have for this year. It's a continuation of our work last year. But I think that those will be kind of the critical areas that we need to work for several years to come. So, all right. That's probably enough for today. Again, I know everyone is just struggling and processing what is going on in DC right now. It's a heavy moment, and I encourage you to take advantage of the resources that we have to help process this and work through this. And on the other health fronts and the other parts of what we're doing, I just hope that you all continue to stay safe and healthy and as good as possible with everything that's going on. So with that, we're going to wrap up today with reintroducing the tradition of having a story from someone in our community about how they are using our services and getting value from what we build and why it's meaningful in their lives. This was always one of my favorite parts of Q&A, and I'm excited to build this back in. So let's go to it.